Welcome everyone, Questine here with my leveling guide for World of Warcraft Burning Crusade Classic, specifically focused on dungeon leveling. Why dungeon leveling? Because it's the safest, most reliable, and effective way to get to 70 as quickly as possible. What you want to do to avoid the Zerg. If you can get ahead of the Zerg, that's great. That's not to say that there aren't many quests, in point of fact, that are worth doing in Burning Crusade, because there are. There's many quest rewards, so if you're starting with no gear, you may actually want to quest before you start doing dungeons, but for the vast majority of players, it is going to be a faster and safer way of getting to 70. The problem with questing Burning Crusade is twofold. One, it's based on quest chains, so if you get stuck at one point, you're going to end up running out of quests, and there are many quests where it's very easy to get stuck, because even with higher spawn rates, you still are either dependent on drops or dependent on picking up one item in the world, and we've already seen in Eversong and the Ghostlands how that can turn out being a disaster and a complete and massive waste of time. Add to that the griefing, the PvP situation that is likely to occur on many servers, and questing just isn't going to be a reliable method. That's not to say it's not worth doing. If you can do it, there are certain quests that are absolutely going for, like in Hellfire, you have Cruel Intentions, in Zangarmarsh, there's a spellcaster trinket you can pick up in Terokkar, there's Shatar and Lower City quests that are worth doing once you've done some dungeons in those areas. But for the most part, you can't rely on it, and that's the problem. It's probably better to view questing as something that you can maybe do optionally, maybe do a couple of quests just to get that can be done very quickly and efficiently for the sake of an experience bonus, as opposed to your main method of leveling. That's the best way you can see it. And then there's a question of having quests and turning them in as the Dark Portal is opening. Well, the problem with that, even though it's worth doing, absolutely worth doing, you know, getting 25 quests or even more than that. Some people are planning to get a lot of levels by abusing the quest system in vanilla, having a lot of quests ready to go, turning them in, getting multiple levels just as the Dark Portal is opening. Well, the problem with that is beyond the amount of preparation it takes, beyond the fact that you're also abusing, if you're going for dozens upon dozens of quests, you're abusing the situation in vanilla, you're abusing the systems Blizzard created, and that may not work as well as you think. Beyond those kind of issues, the main point you can get stuck on is actually being able to get through the Dark Portal. The servers are going to be very unstable. We've seen it already. We've seen the lag. We've seen the queues. It's going to be a lot worse when TBC actually comes out. A lot of people are likely going to be stuck trying to even get through the damn portal. So my advice would actually be, if you want to do quests, do so. Like if you want to turn in quests, do so, but understand the risk of doing so is that you get stuck in Azeroth and you can't go to Outland. One way to possibly circumvent this problem is to have your main character, like say Sinnelleos or Eastern Plaguelands, traveling, turning in quests, while you have another account with alts that are going for the portal in your group, and they're summoning people from your group to Hellfire. That's one way potentially of circumventing the problem. How effective that's going to be, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But there's risks in turning in quests, but there's of course also a reward with respect to that. When it comes to leveling itself, when it comes to dungeon leveling, there are certain group compositions that are going to work and some that are not going to be quite as effective. With regards to building your group, it's important to understand that you want to build a group all the way from 60 to 70. You want a group comp that's going to work every step of the way. So early on, certain group comps will work brilliantly. Like one of the fastest ways to clear dungeons actually early on would be just like say stacking 4 Fury Warriors with a healer and just going to town. But that wouldn't work later on, because you're dealing with mobs and bosses that are going to end up being higher level than you, and because of the hit requirements getting higher and higher as you level and as you're dealing with higher level mobs, things are not going to work out in the long term. They might work in the short term, but in the long term you need a different kind of group composition. And with that in mind, using the Wowhead Rate Composition tool, I'm going to build several groups to showcase what you should go for as just ideas. Well, every leveling group would benefit from having a Beast Mastery Hunter. Why Beast Mastery? Well, physical DPSers are really great in terms of single target DPS, and if you are talking about the Fury Warrior in terms of cleaving down mobs, sweeping strikes, cleave, whirlwind. But the problem physical DPSers have is as you're dealing with higher level mobs and bosses, you start dealing with glancing blows, right? Because your weapon skill is now maxed out, and you won't be able to max it out until it's 70. Until you're 70, you're just going to do significantly reduced damage. The higher up you go, the more weapon skill is required, the less damage you're going to do. Hunters don't have this problem, nor do they have the problem that casters DPS have, which is getting a lot of their spells resisted. So hunters are the strongest DPS on single target while leveling, and they are a genuine benefit to have in a group, especially for the latter stages of leveling. When you're 68 plus, when you're 68, you will want to do the level 70 dungeons, and there you will greatly benefit from having a BM hunter in your group. Beyond that, you will want an AoE DPSer. And sure, you could use, say, a mage, you could use an elemental shaman, but those are going to be in very limited supply, largely because guilds will not want too many of them as part of their raid groups. So if you can get one elemental shaman or frost mage, that's great. Or more likely in guilds, you're going to find a lot of warlocks. Hunters and warlocks, hunters and warlocks. Welcome to the Burning Crusade. This is your life. This is what, these are two classes are going to be the mainstay of your raid DPS, and they're the ones that you're likely going to find the most. You can level without a warlock, hell, you can level without a hunter, but having these two, or at least one of these two in your group is just going to significantly improve your leveling speed. For warlocks, it's worth saying that having Shadow Fury, which is something you wouldn't want to have regularly once you get to 70, but having Shadow Fury while leveling because you don't have Seed of Corruption will help you. Okay, beyond that, there's a question of tanking. Well, the best tank in the game for dungeons is the Prop Paladin. For 5-mans, even for 10-mans, Paladin tanks are the best tanks in the game by far and away, just because of their AoE threat capability, and also their capability of surviving tanking far more mobs than other tanks. Now, of course, Paladins will not start with the same kind of tanking gear that warriors will have, but because of their AoE threat, their AoE tanking capabilities, they are the best tanks, even in crap gear. If you have 200 spell damage or so, you can hold aggro against AT-ish geared warlocks without too many issues. Then you have Protection Warriors and, of course, Feral Druids. A well-geared Feral Druid is probably better than a well-geared Protection Warrior, but finding a well-geared Feral Druid may end up being quite a bit of a challenge. I've seen a well-geared Feral Druid tank very effectively in dungeons, though, on the beta, but he was wearing things like Badge from AQ, so just worth saying that's a pretty unique situation. Then you have the healing question. What kind of healer should you use? Well, the best healer in the game is actually the Holy Priest. And when I say the best, I mean an overall healing ability and single target healing because of greater heal and AoE healing ability because of Circle of Healing. And yes, every priest should spec into Circle of Healing. There's no discussion. You don't need Spirit, you want Circle. But Holy Priests are great. But it's not just about output, it's about mana regeneration. Holy Priests are really powerful. The reason you may see them in limited numbers is because groups want the buffs of other healers, like Resto Shamans, for instance, who have all their totems, including Wind Fury, have Mana Tide, have Nature Swiftness as a heal ability. So Shamans are also pretty solid, but they do need gear to become very effective healers. But you'll be fine using a Resto Shaman. You'll be quite fine using a Resto Shaman as a healer while leveling, and then Resto Druids. Holy Paladins just don't have the group healing, which you will want and you'll benefit from while doing dungeon leveling. But more on that in a bit. So all healers are viable. All of them bring something different to the table. Holy Priests are the best. Resto Shamans are fairly solid, and Resto Druids are also fairly solid. Beyond that, you have one DPS slot. What do you get for that last DPS slot? Well, you could throw in an Elemental Shaman as an example. And one of the things, by the way, to mention about hunters, and a thing that makes them more useful as well, is they can put slow traps on the ground. So can shamans with their totems, but they're not quite as effective. Or you can use a mage for improved blizzard. That's also very effective. or you can go with 2 Destruction Warlocks in a group. That can also work. All of these are perfectly viable, and all of these are very, very strong. But what about the other classes? What about the other specs that aren't represented here? What about, say, Balanced Druids, Combat Rogues, Enhanced Shamans, Holy and Rep Paladins, DPS Warriors, Shadow Priests? What about all of these? Well, Balanced Druids don't have AoE as casters, and they also aren't the strongest in terms of single target. They're great in raiding, even in 10-man, but they're not good for 5-man, so off they go. Rogues. Rogues are the worst class to bring to a leveling group, flat out. They're not so bad early on, but later on they have the same issues as every other melee in the game, and they don't have the strongest cleave. On top of that, they don't have great survivability. If you bring a rogue, let me be very clear on this. If you bring a rogue to a 5-man, period, you're carrying that rogue. He is dead weight on many things. And oh, sure, many rogues, oh, I can stun and interrupt. It's like, yeah, other people can CC as well. Other people can interrupt mobs as well. That's not really a benefit. Rogues, absolute dog shit. What about Fury Warriors? Well, Fury Warriors are really strong early on because of their cleaving, their whirlwind. Fury Warriors are actually the highest melee DPSers in the game for pretty much the entire game. The only ones that compare with them are rogues if said rogue gets Warglyphs. Outside of that, Fury Warriors are the highest melee DPSer. They're strong. But because all melee suffer due to glancing blows while leveling, they're not really that great. You can use them, keep in mind, but there might be some limitations there. Enhanced Shamans, same issues as other melee. Again, you can use them. Like, if there are 2 melee DPSers that you may want to use in a leveling group, despite the inherent issues that melee have, it's Enhanced Shamans and Fury Warriors. But if you can choose, go without them. That would be my personal advice on this issue. Shadow Priests, they only have single target DPS, but they can be good in terms of keeping the mana of the group up, giving you that extra mana regeneration, so you can just keep going constantly without really stopping. That's where they're useful. But still, not as great as other caster DPSers. Might be worth having a Shadow Priest though, just because of the stamina buff in a group that doesn't have, for instance, the stamina buff, like say in this kind of situation. That might be useful. But outside of that, their use is limited. Then Holy and Retribution Paladins. Holy Paladins are not great 5-man healers. They just don't have the group healing that other healers have. And on top of that, they don't have the mana regeneration as other healers have. So you're going to end up being slower if you bring a Holy Paladin. And they're not terrible. They're just the worst healer of all the healers in a 5-man situation. And then Rep Paladins. Rep Paladins have all the issues other melee have, but on top of that, they're a 2-hand DPSer. So if you don't have a Wind Fury for them, they're pretty shit. To begin with. They can do some damage early on single target, but they also don't have any kind of cleaving ability. Nor do they have the insane burst damage or utility, let's say an Enhanced Shaman, so Rep Paladins shouldn't be used. In fact, all Paladins, be it Holy or Ret, all Paladins should level up as protection. The benefits of having a protection Paladin in front of main group are significant, and you're not really going to benefit that much from having a Ret or Holy Paladin in your 5-man leveling group. Now, as for the dungeons themselves, you will want to do the Hellfire Citadel dungeons. Go for the Dark Portal and start doing Ramparts and or Blood Furnace. Unless you're the kind of player who's starting with absolutely no gear, then in that case you need to quest before you do these dungeons. This isn't ideal, by the way. If you actually have to quest because you have no gear, because say you have communal gearing or pretty bad gear, then you're gonna have some issues later down the line. The reason behind that is the dungeons themselves, and this applies to all dungeons, while leveling, be it in Hellfire, in Zangarmarsh, in Auchindoun, the dungeons themselves will give your reputation level up until Honored, at which point they'll stop, whereas quests will always give you reputation. So if you're thinking about the reputation aspect about it, the best way to min-max your reputation is to do the dungeons until Honored, then do quests, if you can do any quests while leveling, which many people won't be able to. But of course, if you don't have gear, you need to do quests. There's plenty of good gear from quests in Hellfire that you can then use to do dungeon spamming. Anyway, with that in mind, what dungeon should you do? Well, you should not skip Hellfire. Some people are thinking, oh, we'll just gonna do slave pens, we'll just do that over and over again. Well, here's the thing, slave pens is not a great instance if you're 60. It's gonna take longer, actually, than either considerably longer than Ramparts or Blood Furnace, and it won't necessarily give you the great experience that you might think. I mean, Ramparts can give you 50,000 to 60,000 experience per run, and it's easily one of the fastest dungeons to do while leveling in Burning Crusade. Blood Furnace may take, 20, 24 minutes. Some people can do it faster, but it will give you 80 to 90,000 experience. That's more, by the way, than a Slave Pens. Now, Slave Pens is worth doing at a certain point, but not as you're just going through the Dark Portal. You do want to do Hellfire. And on top of that, you want to do it for the reputation. You don't want to get to 70 and have absolutely no reputation with Thralmar or Honor Hold. Now, the question between Ramparts and Blood Furnace, some people would say, oh, you don't want to do Ramparts, you just want to do Blood Furnace because Ramparts will be too fast. There is validity to this argument. Ramparts is a very efficient dungeon. You can do it in around 12 minutes with a well-geared group, full consumables, all that kind of stuff. We've managed to do this in the beta. I managed to do it with Pug, so a well-organized group would be able to do it faster. Now, in an ideal world, what you would do, because, sure, you might get locked out, but you could just do some Ramparts, get that 50, 60k XP per run, which is probably the best XP per hour, by the way, when we're thinking about the speed at which you can do the dungeon. Do these dungeons, get out, go to Ramparts, do that. In an ideal world. In a real world, running from dungeon to dungeon is, one, a waste of time, two, it's risky because you might get ganked, likely you will get ganked. So what you want to do, you want to find the dungeon, you want to stay in there, and you want to use someone's character, be it some person in a guild or someone having multiple accounts, to reset the dungeon for you. Just logging out, resetting the dungeon for you. That's what you would want to do to avoid the potential of being ganked. But really, it depends on your clear speed. If you can manage in around 12, 13 minutes, maybe 15, then you're fine. But if you're going faster than that, then you may consider Blood Furnace. Just keep in mind this about Blood Furnace. Yes, some people in very well-organized groups have been able to do it very quickly on the beta in particular. But Blood Furnace carries risks. Not only are there several mobs that can hit hard, the technicians in particular throw grenades that do 400 to 500 damage each, but you also have mines, you have charges, you have knockbacks, and all of that serves to slow you down. So Blood Furnace may not be worth doing in terms of speed. It may not be worth doing in terms of XP per hour. That's the kind of choice you have to make. Now, again, in an ideal world, you do a couple of Ramparts, and you do maybe a Blood Furnace or two, and then, mix and match between the two. But realistically, you're going to have to choose. Maybe, you do some Ramparts, then you do, maybe you do an hour of Ramparts, then you do an hour of Blood Furnace. That depends on how you feel about it. And you should test. Don't go into this, don't go into this with the idea, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to deviate from this. No, it obviously depends on your group, depends on the server stability, the state of your server, how many layers there are, how safe it is to traverse. But my recommendation is at least try Ramparts because it's very quick, it's very efficient, and it's not dangerous. And then if you're having problems with the lockout, consider doing Blood Furnace. And this is something you want to do until you're 62. Once you reach 62, you want to go to Zangarmarsh. You may want to stop along the way in Shatrath to put your Hearthstone there, by the way. Pick up the flight points along the way. Maybe do a couple of quests as well, like some quests in Falcon Watch, Cruel Intentions, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you would stop and do that. If you can can do some of the quest chains, you should, especially those that unlock dungeon quests. And by the way, you should try and do as many dungeon quests as possible because they are very quick. But the problem with the ones in Hellfire Citadel is outside of clearing the ramparts, they're all tied in some way, shape, or form to chains. And, well, there's a follow-up from ramparts that takes you to Blood Furnace. Anyway, doing those quests is worth it. Then you move on to Zangarmarsh, and then you have Slave Pens and Underbog. Now, a lot of people take the view that Slave Pens is the dungeon to go for. There's reason in that. You can pull a lot of packs, you can pull a lot of mobs, you can do it quickly and efficiently. The Slave Pens does have one issue, in that it doesn't have an easy way out. and that is a bit of a problem. Sure, you can use someone to reset the dungeon for you, but walking out the slave pens does take some time. Just bear that in mind when it comes to it. And it's not necessarily the greatest XP per hour. You're really never going to see the same kind of XP per hour as you do in Hellfire Citadel. I mean, a single ramps can give you, a single blood furnace that is, can give you 80 to 90k. You're not going to see dungeons, once you're 62, giving you that same kind of experience, really. In fact, you're probably going to average below that, like 70 to 80k or something like that, even less as you get higher and higher levels. My personal preference would be to actually go in Underbog. Underbog has more mobs and has a way to reset the dungeon, has a way to walk out of the dungeon very quickly. You just jump down after you kill the final boss. No major issue. And there's plenty of AoE packs. Sure, there are some big mobs that you do solo, but there's also plenty of AoE packs available in Underbog. But regardless of your personal choice on this, and these dungeons can take about the same kind of length, dependent on how you do them. But regardless of what you're doing, you will want to do these dungeons in Zangarmarsh from 62 to 64. Then when you're 64, you want to move on to Auchindoun. Again, like with Hellfire, there are some certain quests you may want to do at this point. There's also a dungeon quest you can pick up, and you shouldn't turn that in, by the way, until you're honored. There are some certain quests once you're honored that you want to do. But either way, you should want to leave Zangarmarsh once you're 64. Regardless of how many dungeon runs or quests you've done. Once you're 64, get out of there and move on to Terokkar, to Auchindoun. And here you have the choice between Auchinai Crypts and Mana Tombs. Now, Mana Tombs is a fairly long, can be a long dungeon, can have some annoying mobs, but you can do, if you have certain groups, you can do it pretty quickly, like 20 minutes, 16 minutes, something like that. But there are some annoying mobs to deal with. A full quest run, however, of Mana Tombs is something you should do, though maybe something you should do once you're, say, 66 or close to 66, not something you do instantly, but something you do a bit later. Like there's an escort quest in Mana Tombs, absolutely worth doing a quest run of Mana Tombs, single run for the quest, not only because of the XP, but also the quest rewards themselves. But what you will benefit from doing it when you are 64 is Auchinai Crypts. Auchinai Crypts has the same issue as Slave Pens in that there is no easy way to get out of it, so there's a long run, but Crypts is not only a very fast dungeon, but it also has the potential of giving you a lot of experience. Why is that? Well, because the mobs are easy to deal with. They're not hard to kill at all. And they're also higher level than you. Like, they have low armor, low HP, they die very quickly, like, you bring a tier 3 geared party here, they're gonna smash this place to pieces, despite the fact that mobs are higher level. But the key about Auchinai Crypts is, due to the fact that the mobs are higher level, you gain more XP from them. And you likely will, if you're going here at 64, you're likely going to get either the same experience per run as you would in a full Mana Tombs, or even potentially more. So, or somewhere, along those lines. And that's just because of the level difference. So it's absolutely worth doing Auchinai Crypts, especially if you have someone that can reset the dungeon for you, as opposed to Mana Tombs. But again, personal preference. You should test it out, check it out, see what you prefer doing. Once you are 66, this is where there's some trouble coming up. Once you are 66, you do have a choice to make, and there's issues that start arising here. Leveling up until 66 is pretty good, pretty efficient. There's also quests you can possibly do as well, like Lower City quests with regards to the caravan, or Shtar quests with regards to their camp. Might be worth doing. There's some good trinkets, by the way, if you're lacking in that department. At least do the trinket quests, get those. They're not hard, they don't take that much time. But either way, once you're 66, do expect a slowdown when it comes to dungeon experience. I mean, theoretically, once you're 66, you could just go do Ring of Blood. Good luck with that. I don't think many groups will be able to manage that, for the record, because just the potential of griefing there, even from your own faction, is very, very high. Your choice in terms of dungeons is either Cephek Halls, which is a long and tedious dungeon with a lot of annoying abilities, though you should do it because there's plenty of good loot from this place that you can get, and it gives you Lower City reputation, or doing Durnholde. Now, here's the thing. Durnholde, like Black Morass, is not the greatest dungeon when it comes to experience. Doing it once, however, is mandatory. You need to do it once, at least, to unlock the Karazhan Attunement. And doing it once, let's say you've leveled for the night, you've leveled very quickly, you're ahead of the Zerg, you should go to Tenaris, and you should do the whole escort quest. You could potentially do it while dead. You don't, on the beta, we were able to do the escort quest that you have to do in order to enter the dungeon. We were able to do it by just standing still at the quest giver. Whether or not that applies in Classic is something we have to wait and see. It should. I don't see why that would necessarily change, but maybe they would. But either way, this is something you have to do. Everyone has to do this once, because you need to do this quest, you need to do Durnholde, and you need to get into Black Morass. One run of Durnholde, because you're doing the quest at the same time for it, is worth an enormous amount of XP. One run. After that, not quite as much, honestly. When you're thinking about the whole RP, the way the packs are, you just don't have the same kind of the number of mobs. You also have annoying abilities that will slow you down. The RP will slow you down, so it's probably not worth it XP per hour. So more likely, once you're 66, you will want to do a lot of Cephalic holds. Now, if you find that prospect very tedious, and let's be clear, it is, then what you can do as well is start questing. Not necessarily in a Grand. Don't go there. You will regret your life choices. I mean, I guess with higher spawn rates, the kill quest wouldn't be too bad. And if you're going as a party, you can do the Nizingwari stuff very quickly. But once you're 66, you could also just go on Blade's Edge. You would want to do this anyway to unlock the flight path and just do some of the quests there. Like, don't shy away from questing, especially if you're ahead of the Zerg. But again, this depends on a server-by-server basis, how your personal situation is. But it's something that is worth considering. You shouldn't discount questing completely. I mean, if you're a group, if you can do quests very quickly, it's absolutely worth it at this stage. And even when you're 68, it's also worth it. Once you do reach the 68 to 70 range, what are your choices? Well, you could continue doing Cephalic holes if you so desire, but the experience per hour is going to fall off a cliff at this particular stage. But the better choice at this point, the better choice is to start doing the level 70 dungeons. Your choices here are Steam Vaults, Shattered Holes, Shadow Labs, or Black Morass. Avoid Black Morass like the plague. Some guides recommend it. Those guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. Black Morass is a long, tedious dungeon with very little experience gain. Lots of rep that you need. But in terms of experience, not worth it at all. The best dungeon, the best choices are either Shattered Holes or Shadow Labyrinth. Shattered Holes does require a quick key, but that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to get, actually, though getting the Motes of Fire can be a bit of a problem. But again, not the worst choice in the world. You would also have to kill a Void Reavers, which means going back to Hellfire, which means dealing with all the people there, so problems. But either way, Shadow Holes is a good solid option, or you can do Shadow Labyrinth. In Shadow Labyrinth, you may encounter issues at the second boss if you're doing it when you're 68, just because of the mana issues, the glancing blow issues, the resist issues I mentioned before. This is where having a hunter will really help you out in terms of doing it. But in Shadow Labyrinth, you can clear up the rooms up to the second boss, just do big AoE pulls, kill everything as quickly and efficiently as possible, or you can do the whole thing. What you decide to do depends on your group and how comfortable you are in terms of doing it, but you can earn a lot of experience either way. Just keep in mind, dungeons at this point are going to be probably around the 30-minute mark, if not more. And you're going to have to end up doing a lot of dungeons at this stage to get to 70. But of course, you're also earning reputation. Consider the fact that you're also earning reputation that you do need. So it might be worth just, doing all of these dungeons, really, except BM. That's really not worth your time. Maybe one or two here and there. But you should just leave BM until later, until you're actually 70. It can be nasty. You can actually wipe there if you're not careful. Don't underestimate these dungeons. I know a lot of people coming into Burning Crusade think, oh, everything is going to be so easy. No. People with full tier 3 managed to wiping these dungeons just because a lot of people underestimated them, especially when they were lower leveled than the dungeons. Sure, once they've gone to 70, once people have some decent level of gearing, no problem whatsoever. But coming over from Classic and only relying and largely reliant on dungeon gearing, that's going to be a very different situation altogether. Don't underestimate these dungeons, but it might be worth mixing things up just for the sake of the reputation, if nothing else. Or if you just want to get to 70 as quickly as possible, just doing Shallow Labyrinth over and over again might be worth it. Or you could, and not necessarily something I would recommend wholeheartedly, but you could just go to Netherstorm and do a Netherstorm or Shadow Moon Valley and do some quests, if that's available. If you're ahead of the Zerg, at this point, you might just consider doing that. Though, it might also be worth saving those zones until you're actually 70 so you can get a lot more gold from them. You can gain thousands of gold from these two zones if you save it up until 70. Anyway, that's all really there is to say on this. How long is it going to take, you might ask? Well, anywhere between 30 to 40 hours. I mean, it does depend on a lot of factors. It does depend on how much prep you've made, how many consumables, what's your gear level, what your group is. But I do personally expect anywhere between 34 to over 40 hours for most groups to reach level 70. Obviously, some people will reach level 70 much faster than that. Some people are going to abuse the quests in Classic to just gain instantly several levels or a level and a half, and obviously those people are going to be faster. But I think it is a good metric to have anywhere between 34 to 40 hours plus to get from 60 to 70. And that's something you should be prepared for. The longest stretch is going to be from 66 to 70. That's when things are going to slow down dramatically. And because the dungeons that give you a lot of experience until that point stop giving you that same kind of experience, and the dungeons you have available at 66 and ahead take significantly longer, like things like Cephalic Halls, Durnholde, Shadow Labs, Steam Vaults, and so on. On a final note, when it comes to getting your skills, I strongly recommend going to the trainers at level 64 and 68 at the very least. For some people, maybe at 62, 66, though that's not quite as important. There's many spell ranks that many abilities that people earn that are very useful at 64 in particular. That's probably the most important part. And beyond that, there's not much really else to say. You can expect most dungeons to take about 20 plus minutes, 24 minutes, anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on your groups. Some dungeons will take faster, some dungeons will be slower, some dungeons will have mobs and bosses that hit really hard. Don't underestimate what you're dealing with in Burning Crusade, and do expect a hard time, especially when you're dealing with higher level dungeons, the level 70 dungeons when you're doing them at 68, because we certainly experienced this in the beta. We walked into these dungeons and we ended up actually wiping quite a few times. Now, of course, if you have a well-oiled group, this shouldn't be too much of a problem. But your experience early on is that the dungeons are going to be very easy, because of course they are. They're designed for people who literally walked through the Dark Portal and did a couple of quests. A group with full buffs, especially world buffs, if those are going to work, is going to destroy those dungeons very easily. But things can and will change once you reach those higher levels. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned.